Be there.
It subsequently genuinely did change everything about my life.
You had to be there.
Yeah, latest version and latest episode of You Had to Be There on this morning's OTB AM. Delighted to welcome to the show this morning the Sunday Independent sports writer Declan Lynch. Declan, how are things?
Good.
Thanks for hopping on. I know this is a stressful slot for a lot of people because narrowing it down to 5 is not an easy thing to do. Your list, I have to say, is eclectic and different and varied, and it's a throwback as well. Some of them we'll get straight into them because at number 1 we're going all the way back to 1974. It's an FAI Cup semi-final, Athlone Town, your own beloved Athlone Town, in a 5-0 defeat, I think it is, to Finn Harps at Oriel Park. Memorable for a number of reasons, this one, Declan.
Yeah, this was such a big event at the time for me and for any Athlone Town fan. We were in the Cup semi-final for the first time. We'd gone up with Finn Harps a few years before into the League of Ireland. So there was kind of the two clubs were kind of on a similar sort of footing, except Harps were really good now. They were very good. Brendan Bradley and Charlie Ferry and players like that. Athlone were also very good. This was the team that the following year would the famous draw with AC Milan. So they were a good side, and it was such a kind of an event because it was in Oriel Park, and I guess it was such a prize at the end of it. I mean, the idea at the time that you would have be in the FAI Cup final and it would be covered live on television was kind of incredible, right? At the time, it used to be a big thrill if you got a little, highlight, a few minutes of highlights on a Sunday night on this RTB sports program that they used to have. I remember, like, if there was TV coverage down in St. Mel's Park, they'd throw up a bit of scaffolding and, build a kind of a temporary TV stand. And poor Jimmy McGee would have to climb up the ladder and do his best for about 3 minutes of highlights. But to actually sort of be on the cusp of, having a full, live cup final at Dalymount, it was like moving from medieval times into the modern world. So all of these things were kind of creating this huge sense of occasion on the day, and Athlone, I think, they'd stayed in the Ballymascanlon Hotel in Dundalk the previous night. It was a big deal. Everything was being done properly. And we were very confident, even though, Harps was very good. And everything went horribly wrong. Harps were great on the day. They went into a 2-0 lead. And at that point, something snapped, literally. I mean, Mick O'Brien, the goalkeeper, who was a beloved character. I mean, Mick, his heart was absolutely in the right place. He was, hugely fit and enthusiastic. And, at St. Mel's, he used to do all these complex exercises to keep himself entertained while the ball was at the other end of the pitch. So he was a real character, and everybody loved Mick. And Mick was maybe so upset or so kind of disturbed by what was happening himself that he swung on the crossbar at Oriel. And the crossbars at Oriel were not made of the same stuff as the crossbars at St. Mel's, which were kind of steel, I guess. Or
we've got a video here rolling across the screen as well of one of these incidents, I think. So he properly breaks in half.
Yeah, it was literally just, it was a wooden crossbar, I guess, and he wasn't accustomed to it, and it just broke. And it was just so shocked. There was an announcement, is there a carpenter in the ground? No, this kind of thing.
He was playing left back.
And they kind of, the game was stopped for several minutes, and there was, they literally hammered a job together on the crossbar. And the game resumed somehow. It went into a further decline for Athlone. The match finished 5-0 for Harps, but at a certain stage, Mick, he said later that he was trying to fix the bar, that he saw something that he thought might sort of fix it. I guess he might have been afraid it would come down again or something. And he had another kind of go at it. And again, the whole thing came.
So twice it happens.
Okay. Now, he was sent off. He was actually suspended for a good while afterwards. It appeared on Saint and Greavesy the following weekend.
Oh, brilliant!
You know, kind of all right, Saint. Look at the Irish. You know, it became like our disgrace spread throughout the world. You know, it was like the worst possible outcome for the day. Like I remember going back from Dundalk that day, and I don't think I've ever been as depressed after any sporting event that would, since. I mean, I'm permanently scarred by it, and that was the famous. And it was such a pity that as well it was Nick O'Brien, because he didn't let us down on the day. Like, Mick was a great guy, and he it was really unfortunate that it was him of all people who became the sort of a poster boy for the stay of shame. So that was that.
This should be a precursor to permanently scarred from it. You just named like 3 sporting events. This is our slot for permanent. I could definitely.
You had to be there. You were definitely scarred from it. Maybe come up with a different name for the slot. That's a brilliant first pick, Declan. I have to say, your second pick is also nostalgic. It's mid-70s, Laytown. Now the Laytown races are such an important part of the East Meath culture. But and often used as prep for the Galway Festival, I know as well. But it's a tradition that goes back so far, Declan. You remember, in particular, even one of the horses you backed back in the mid-70s as a kid.
Yeah, well, you see, it was the first. Again, I was just a kid. It was the first race meeting I was ever at, and my father brought me along to it. And it's a mind-boggling thing that Laytown is still there, and it was there at the time. It's like a pop-up race meeting. Has been going for God knows how long, a century, more than that. And it's a full race meeting, right? It's like, they have, to me at the time it seemed always a day out at the seaside or whatever, right? But it was this full race meeting, and it was such a shock to the system. Like, you have, a little kind of parade ring. They had a tote building set up, temporary tote building. Like it had all these sort of usual things of race meeting, and including the actual racing on the Strand when the tide is out. And it was my first race meeting. It was such a formative experience because it was probably the first time I had a bet. It was like probably 20p or something on the tote, and so I remember this horse Bay Tree that won. And the idea would actually, it was free money to be had backing horses, extraordinary sort of discovery. Even like reading the papers beforehand, looking at the tipsters in the morning papers. Remember the Irish press had a particularly good kind of layout. There was this guy who used to do the Form, I think it was called, and he used to give 1, 2, 3. He'd give a preview of the race and go, first, second, and third. And it struck me as well that, what an image of life in general. When you read the tipsters in the morning, and it's all optimism, and they're making a case for their selections, and it's all kind of, the day is full of possibilities. Yeah. And there's nothing quite like reading those guys on the way home, right?
With the old battered newspaper.
Right? You now know what the day has brought, and reality has set in again, right? And but I still used to enjoy reading them somehow on the way home, and just thinking like, God, that glad, confident morning, no more, as we drive home with no money.
Totally relate to what he's saying as well.
It was fantastic just to be at that meeting, and like I've seen it covered by At the Races and stuff, who regard it as a great novelty. This race meeting on the Strand, but it set me off really. My father used to bring me to race meetings, but there was a good friend of mine whose father as well was a big racing man, and I probably went to more meetings with him because he was an absolutely inveterate. He was from the north. He was a solicitor from the north, from Armagh, and a lot of those guys used to go to. There was a bunch of them used to go to a lot of meetings like Dundalk, and particularly Phoenix Park, which would be my next selection, I guess, in terms of racing. I loved the park particularly. I think it's one of the great losses to our civilization that there's no more racing at Phoenix Park. There was just something about it. It was like it was a very very odd track, you know. It had a very strange finishing post. Like the finishing post was at a weird angle of the stand. It wasn't like head on. It kind of was you know, at a strange angle. I'm not sure why. Like the stand were literally kind of in the wrong place, kind of. But it just gave this kind of unique atmosphere to it. They used to have this very old-fashioned thing where you'd have the Artane Boys band or something would play a few toots on the at the start of every race, like you'd see in American films at the start of the race, you know. And it was just a really nice place. Also, I also often thought that when the Celtic Tiger came in, imagine if the Phoenix Park had been still there, that you could literally just walk up to it from the city centre. It was a real kind of loss. Even though by the time it was finished, it was always flat racing, and it had just like you would have like 4 and 5 horses in each race. Now I still really really loved it, and at that point again, I was telling this friend of mine, his father was a really big racing guy, and he would have us listening into people's conversations. Like we were just kids, you know. So he would send us after Barney Curley or someone like that, you know, and just to sort of get the vibe from Barney and see if he was listening. This basically snooping on, like, just to see if he was, you know, muttering anything to one of his associates about what horse might be, you know, going to win this race. I remember once we were sent after Mrs. Magnier, who was the Clem Magnier, the trainer. His wife was seen going into the tub, just have a small bet, I don't know, 50p or something like that. And we were sent, there's Mrs. Magnier, go after Mrs. Magnier and see what she's backing. And we literally stood behind Mrs. Magnier and heard her backing her own horse. Right, okay, 50p on her own horse, and we went back, and that horse won. So we felt we had done great. We had we almost became men in that moment. You know what I mean? That we had delivered the vital piece of information.
I can relate.
It was such a great sort of discovery. All that the racing. It was like all the intrigue and all the sort of just part of the racing itself, which was great. I mean. Just the bookies at the time, like these Sean Graham, Terry Rogers, these guys who would take really large amounts of money, you know. I mean, they would on the nod, they would be taking like, you know, 4 or 5 grand, something like that, and they wouldn't wipe the boards if they got that. You know what I mean? They would take and sort of in maybe they were 7-4, might become 6-4, you know. So it was great looking at that and just watching bookies themselves. I mean, I sort of would look at these guys and think, what a job. You know, they all seem to have a bit of a tan, you know, and they had these big satchels full of money, and they went to race meetings all the time. You know, what a life, you know. So that'd be like the Phoenix Park would always be my favorite track. I never really liked Leopardstown for some reason. It was more suburban or something. I love the Curragh. The Dock was a great track. You know, but the Phoenix Park, really, that was the one.
Yeah, bringing up a lot of memories there, and like what Declan is saying about the paper, and they used to have these mystical names. They still do, like Captain Keen and the Tipster, and this image then as the race meeting was just bleeding itself to its conclusion, to see the Irish Independent, that one page that was like literally torn out of the paper, just like flickering in the wind, and you look at those selections, the crumpled kind of tattered paper that is now no more, but had so much optimism more, and great memories as well. Yeah,
lovely image for sure. And your next pick, Declan, we're going to 1989 for your penultimate pick. The Republic of Ireland beating Spain by a 1-0 at Lansdowne Road. This was a qualifier, of course, for the Italia 90 World Cup. Great atmosphere at this match, I'm told, and a serious memory for you as well.
Yeah, it was an amazing atmosphere, and it was almost like the last time you could have such an atmosphere. I went with George Byrne, the great rock journalist, friend of mine, and George and I had been also at the start of that era, or sorry, the end of the last match that Owen Hams was manager for was Ireland and Denmark. and it was a terrible day. Ireland were beaten 4-1 by Denmark, who were a really good team at the time. And I remember that later that night, we were in the international bar, drowning our sorrows, and Eamon McTamalsh came in. You know, the famous Jewel and Garden, Dublin in the rare old times.
Dad of Shane, isn't it?
And we were there, and Eamon McTamalsh came in, and he completely said, Brian Brew was the only fella that could beat them Danes, which didn't improve our mood any greater. But fast forward, and now it's Euro '88 has happened, and Ireland are now looking really good. But there was always this kind of we just beating one of these teams like Spain, like in a really important match, was always kind of a bit elusive. I mean, would be a huge breakthrough if we could manage it in qualifiers for Italian 90. And we were on the terraces opposite the main stand. And the interesting thing is, it was just a few weeks after Hillsborough, so the whole world of football, the standing on terraces and all that kind of thing would start becoming a kind of almost a thing of the past. But there was this really intense atmosphere, almost like a kind of a crazed atmosphere on the day. There's 50,000 people at it, which in itself is kind of scary. And the Spaniards, it was really interesting to see it. Like, they were disturbed by it. They were put off by it. Anytime any of them would go near the touchline to take a throw in, they would be shouting at them. It was a really kind of frenzied atmosphere. And I remember, like, Steve Staunton was on our side of the pitch, like, obviously for the first half. He was really good on the day. He was, he was just come into the side, and we would think, oh, here's another guy, Steve Staunton. I mean, he's good, and he even wasn't one of the main players for us, So Ireland scored after about 17 minutes, and at the time we thought it was Frank Stapleton. It turned out it was actually an own goal by Mitchell, the Spanish guy. Now, I call him Mitchell because apparently that's the correct pronunciation. Everybody called him Michelle, but Jack Charlton called him Mitchell, and Jack was right. It turned out. Now, Jack wasn't intentionally right, but he just preferred to call him Mitchell. And as it happens, as luck would have it, Jack was always sort of lucky, even in this, for not pronouncing Spaniards' names. So it turned out it was an OG, but the Spaniards didn't take it well at all. I mean, like, Butragueno was their big player at the time. He was taken off in the second half, and they complained afterwards, saying this was not a football match. The pitch was terrible, and the pitch was terrible. It was a rugby pitch. Jack used to actually praise the groundsman for making it as much like a rugby pitch as possible, because again, he still portrayed us as this kind of underdog up against these sophisticates. But it was, their whole attitude was they had just been subjected to this sort of medieval savagery, and it wasn't football, which only kind of increased our sense of jubilation. But it was 1-0. Ireland won that game, and that was absolute. That really was a breakthrough. It was the final breakthrough, if you like, of Jack's team. And they qualified fairly easily after that. It was a great day when they beat Hungary 2-0, I think. Really sunny Sunday. But there was a sense that they were on the, you know what I mean, that they were kind of on the home straight at this stage. But that was, that was big.
Yeah, unbelievable. Even reading here, Steve Staunton was not due to start, but Chris Morris, the regular right back, recovering from an appendix surgery, and then Chris Houghton moved from right to left back to accommodate Staunton. Your final pick then, Declan, is another brilliant one. Padraig Harrington winning the Irish PGA Championship in 2007, a week before his first major at Carnoustie in the Open. So this was at the European Club at the beautiful British Bay, Downey County, Wicklow.
Yeah, it was on. They'd almost put it on specially for Padraig, because it was a week before Carnoustie, before he won his first major. And it was a wee bit like Laytown. You could want people. We wandered up there with the kids, myself and a couple of friends of mine, who were 5 or 6 years of age, and it was very open and very it wasn't a huge crowd at it. There was a lot of local people, and you could just kind of wander around after Padraig. It was really unusual. It's something very old fashioned about it. because again, it wasn't the Irish Open, it was the Irish PGA, which is so it wasn't a huge corporate event, but it was at the European Club, which is a great track really, because what I like about it is it's very understated. The actual during the Celtic Tiger years, all these Taj Mahals were built in the middle of nowhere, these golf clubhouses, these luxurious, magnificent sort of creations. Whereas the European Club isn't really like that. Do you know what I mean? It's more sort of understated. It's all about the golf, So it was a great venue. They set it up more or less specifically for Padraig. But even then, he won. One thing you get the sense of is how good Padraig Harrington is at golf. There's a kind of a myth that Padraig, he has many virtues, and he's wonderful attitude, but maybe he's not all that good at golf, but he's actually really good, right? And particularly his short game. You could, when you were up close, you could see just how good he is around the green on links courses and everything, which of course he demonstrated the following week. But even the following week, I remember on the Saturday before they played in Carnoustie, a friend of mine saying, look, I love Padraig, but he's just not going to win major. So even then, he'd set the thing up. He'd approached it really well, and he knew he was probably going to win a major. But even until he did it, nobody really believed him. But it was really enjoyable there. Naturally, he won the Irish PGA. He always felt he had to ensure it since they set it up for him. I think he won it in the playoff. But the day we saw him, it was really kind of pleasant day. You were up very close to him. You could see how kind of fit he was. Do you know what I mean? He looked really impressive, and he was just really good. So, I always think we were there just before he walked through the door into immortality. We got to see Padraig,
Brilliant. Now they're wonderful picks, Declan. Just to run people through them again: FAI Cup semi-final 1974, Mick O'Brien breaking the crossbar twice, the Athlone Town goalkeeper, in that 5-0 defeat to Finn Harps. You had the Laytown races in the mid-70s in East Meath. You had the Phoenix Park races in the late 80s as well. And the famous late great Terry Rogers, the bookmaker, as well. Ireland's win over Spain at Lansdowne in 1989, that 1-0 win, and Steve Staunton's performance that day in particular, and Padraig Harrington winning the Irish PGA Championship at European Club in 2007, a week before Carnoustie. Declan, great picks. Thanks a million for those. I know it's not easy to narrow them down, but fair play.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Great stuff. Declan Lynch there, the Sunday Independent sports writer. That is your latest episode of You Had to Be There.
It's so unexpected.
It's one of those you had to be there moments.